The Barrett lay across the velvet-draped table like a sleeping giant, its cold steel frame catching the fluorescent light of the crowded exhibition hall. Officers, cadets, and civilians swirled around the display, their footsteps echoing over polished marble. But it wasn't the rifle that stopped the general. It was the woman standing behind it, calm, silent, her posture military straight yet detached, as though she did not entirely belong to the noise around her. He almost passed her without a glance. A man accustomed to ceremony, power, and the endless parade of uniforms. But his eyes caught the small insignia, pinned neatly on her chest. He froze. A sniper's badge. Not ordinary. Not ceremonial. This one bore the numbers etched with reverence and finality, 3,200 meters. For a heartbeat, the general forgot how to breathe. The murmurs of the hall dulled in his ears. The world slowed. The young woman's face was expressionless, yet something in her silence spoke of deserts at dusk, mountains at dawn, and nights when the wind itself carried death. He realized with a jolt that he was looking at someone whose bullet had once traveled 2 miles through the shifting veil of heat and distance straight into history. And no one around her knew. Not the junior officers who sneered under their breath at the plainness of her uniform. Not the cadets who shuffled past, whispering to each other about how out of place she looked among the polished brass. And certainly not the civilians who glanced her way and dismissed her as decoration beside the Barrett .50. But the general knew, and his blood ran cold. She was not supposed to be there. At least, not in the way they thought. She wasn't staff, not an attendant to the display. She had been invited quietly, reluctantly, by a commander who thought perhaps her story deserved recognition, but then tucked her into the corner of the exhibition as though her presence might embarrass the occasion. Her name was Captain Aria Hale. The scar along her jawline told its own story. Thin, pale, it disappeared beneath the collar of her uniform, a reminder of shrapnel that had nearly taken her life in a Syrian valley no one on the civilian guest list could pronounce. She stood still, hands folded behind her back, the quiet dignity of a soldier who had already seen too much. She watched the young officers pass, their medals gleaming. They laughed in clusters, shook hands too firmly, and spoke too loudly. They were full of unspent fire, eager to prove themselves. Aria did not envy them. She pitied them. Because she had once been them. Aria's story began years earlier, long before the scar, long before the Barrett had become an extension of her body. She had grown up in a quiet Midwestern town, the daughter of a mechanic and a schoolteacher. Her life might have been ordinary, unremarkable, had it not been for her brother, Daniel. Daniel was 2 years older, tall, restless, always chasing the horizon. When he enlisted at 18, Aria followed him with her eyes and her heart. Letters came home, folded neatly, ink smudged from desert dust and sweat. He wrote of camaraderie, of honor, of nights staring at the stars with men who became family. And then one day, the letters stopped. The knock on the door came at dusk, just as the sun bled orange across the horizon. 2 men in uniform, hats low, words rehearsed. Her brother was gone. The silence that followed hollowed Aria out. She had been the quiet one, the thoughtful one, never the soldier. But grief does strange things to the human soul. For Aria, it lit a fire she could not contain. She enlisted, and while others stumbled through training, she moved with purpose. Her instructors noticed, calm under pressure, eyes that read distance and wind like a second language. A steadiness that unnerved even the veterans. When they handed her the Barrett .50 for the first time, she did not flinch at its weight. She shouldered it, looked through the scope, and the world fell silent. The chaos of grief, the noise of memory, all narrowed into a single line between eye and target. She became a sniper. Years bled into years. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria. She lived in shadows, moved like a ghost, and carried the lives of her comrades in her trigger finger. And then came the day the shot. A convoy pinned down an open desert, ambushed by fighters hidden in the rocks. Radios crackling with panic, men shouting coordinates that made no sense in the chaos. A high-value target stood at the ridge, orchestrating the slaughter. Rangefinders flickered. The distance was impossible. Aria lay prone, heartbeat steady, the sun blistering against her scope. 3,200 meters. The longest shot she had ever attempted. She remembered Daniel then. His laugh, his letters, his empty chair at the family table. She exhaled, pulled the trigger. The bullet cut through heat and mirage, through silence and prayer, through 2 miles of wind and time. When the man fell, the ambush collapsed. The convoy survived. And with that shot, history carved her name into the quiet corners of military legend. But legends do not always receive parades. Some stay hidden, classified, whispered only in corridors where the public will never tread. Aria returned home not to cheers but to silence. Her badge was discreet, her story buried beneath red tape and secrecy. She wore the weight of what she had done not as pride but as quiet remembrance. And so she stood now, in the exhibition hall, invisible to most, a ghost among uniforms. Until the general froze. His chest tightened. He knew what that badge meant. He knew what it cost. He stopped in front of her, eyes narrowing, while the chatter of the hall flowed obliviously around them. A few nearby officers noticed his pause and glanced curiously at Aria. One smirked, mistaking the silence for awkwardness. Probably just a ceremonial piece, one whispered, tilting his chin toward the sniper badge. They hand those out at competitions sometimes. Aria heard him. She did not respond. Her silence was iron. The general's jaw clenched. He turned, voice low but sharp as a blade. That badge is no competition trophy. The whispering officers stiffened. The hall grew quieter, tension rippling outward like shock waves in water. The general leaned closer, his words carrying the weight of command. That badge was earned at a distance most of you cannot even comprehend. You are standing in front of one of the most lethal snipers this nation has ever produced. A hush spread through the hall. The cadets stopped laughing. The officers looked again, really looked at the scar on her jaw, at the stillness in her stance, at the quiet gravity of her presence. Aria did not speak. She did not need to. Respect was not given freely, not in this hall. It came slowly, reluctantly, seeping into the silence as realization dawned. One by one, the murmurs stopped. The general straightened, his voice now carrying. You see, courage is not always loud. Honor is not always visible. Sometimes it stands quietly, unseen, until the day you realize you are in the presence of someone whose silence has saved lives. Aria's eyes flickered not pride, not satisfaction, but something softer, pain, memory, the weight of every name she carried. The general turned to the room. You would do well to remember this. Medals can shine, but scars speak louder. In that moment, the balance shifted. Where there had been dismissive whispers, there was now silence, heavy with respect. The cadets who had smirked lowered their eyes. The officers who had laughed shifted uneasily. Civilians who had overlooked her now felt the gravity of her presence press upon them. And then, slowly, as if moved by something greater than protocol, men and women in uniform began to straighten. A ripple moved through the crowd. Backs stiffened, hands rose in salute. Not commanded, not ordered, chosen. The hall stood in silence, saluting the woman who had stood for them when they did not even know her name. Aria did not raise her hand in return. She simply inclined her head, the faintest acknowledgement, eyes steady and unbroken. Her silence said more than words ever could. Later, when the exhibition ended and the hall emptied, the Barrett lay quiet again on its velvet. Aria walked out alone into the cool evening air, the murmur of respect still echoing faintly behind her. The general watched her go, hands clasped behind his back, and spoke softly to the officer beside him. History will forget the noise of today, but it will remember her silence. And so it was. A story not of parades or medals, not of speeches or ceremonies, but of a woman who carried both grief and honor in silence. A woman whose bullet had once traveled farther than belief, and whose dignity traveled farther still. Her lesson was clear, that respect is not measured in how loudly we boast, but in how deeply we understand the sacrifices carried quietly by others. Silent strength, the general would later say, is the loudest kind. To those who listened, who felt the weight of her story, the message was not just about one sniper, one badge, or one frozen moment in an exhibition hall. It was about all the silent heroes who walk among us unseen, unrecognized, but carrying worlds on their shoulders. So to you, watching now, ask yourself, how many silent warriors pass you each day, unseen? How many scars are carried quietly by those who ask for nothing in return? If this story reached you, share where you are watching from. Leave a comment with your thoughts. And remember, subscribe for more stories that honor the silent heroes whose strength echoes louder than words. Because sometimes, the greatest victories are not shouted. They are carried in silence.